Hello, my name is Matthew McVitie. I'm the Collections and Exhibits Manager here at the Swordhouse Museum. And today we've got a pretty special collections item that we'd like to share with everybody. Just showcase it for everyone to see. As you can see, it's a small axe, or what we might call a hatchet. The handle is made of probably hard maple or ash. The head is, of course, iron. As you can see, it's seen a lot of use, a lot of wear and tear. We've got some pretty bad rusting and oxidation on this side over here. A little bit of brass ornamentation that was on the handle at one point. And it's not too remarkable as a tool. The pattern is very mid-19th century, and these were meant to be used and used and used, and this one definitely shows signs of that. However, the reason this is in our collection is actually a very interesting story. It's been in the collection since about 1970, and the provenance with it is that it is the hatchet that was used by William Freeman in the Van Ness murders. Now, if you're not familiar with that, William Freeman, he was a half African-American, half Native American man who worked in Auburn, New York, and the surrounding townships and villages. And he was arrested in 1840 for supposedly stealing a horse. It sort of came out that there was no way he possibly could have even stolen this horse. However, he remained in jail for about 6 years. And while he was in prison, he was subject to some very brutal beatings by some of the prison guards, one of which he was actually smacked in the head with a large piece of basswood, and he testifies that he almost immediately lost his hearing after that. And he was sort of picked on because he would continually proclaim his innocence over and over again. When he gets out of prison, a lot of people that knew him before he went in sort of made the case that he could barely remember his own name, that he was often muttering to seemingly no one. He kept sort of mentioning that someone had to pay for his incarceration. And one day in 1846, the Van Ness family is very brutally murdered for also seemingly no reason. They were a very wealthy farming family that lived in Fleming, very close by to Auburn. William Freeman is considered the lead suspect. He's captured, and he's actually proclaimed as the murderer by several people that were there that survived the night, but they passed away a little bit later. He's brought to trial, and the prosecution's case is that because this man is the product of what at that point was thought two inferior races, being half African American and half Native American, that he is predetermined to have these violent tendencies. That's a characteristic that he's going to have naturally. And William Seward, at this time, he's practicing law in Auburn, considers that is not the case, as a matter of fact. That he meets with Freeman, and he also sees that this man can barely remember his own name and is having trouble remembering where he is even, and that this man was probably beaten to the point of insanity in prison. So he makes that case. This is actually one of the first insanity defenses that's used. William Seward used it for a case that was also happening along the same time, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And he actually loses the trial, but he wins an appeal afterwards. William Freeman passes away in prison before that appeal can be heard of tuberculosis, and an autopsy is performed. And it's discovered that portions of his brain had started to decay while he was still alive, sort of vindicating Seward's point that this man had been severely beaten to the point of brain damage, and he was insane because he didn't realize what he was doing at the time. Now, the paperwork that we have for our collections item here states that it's been in the collection since about 1970, and that it was given to the Sword House by a woman whose father was a Cayuga County sheriff in the 1880s. And she testifies that her father came home from work one day and says that William Seward Jr., William Henry Seward's son, gave him this tomahawk and said that it was the murder weapon used by William Freeman in the Van Ness murders. So the staff here, we were pretty intrigued by this. We went back to the original court documents, which are held, some of which are online, a lot of which are at the Cayuga County Museum here in Auburn, and found that it's documented that William Freeman used a knife, actually a very specific knife, 5.5 inches long, 1.5 inches wide, and so on. There's no mention of a tomahawk used, or a hatchet, or an axe, or anything like that at all. So this is a great example of how people can sort of misremember history. This was a case that was sort of mid-career for William Seward in the late 1840s. His son didn't give this to the Cayuga County Sheriff until the 1880s, so it's a good chance that the history was just a little bit misremembered. Even saying that, it's a really cool item that we have here in the collection. We have it on display in our gift shop in a specialty case for the month of October, being a somewhat morbid object for anybody that's a fan of Halloween. And we encourage you to come on down and take a look.